when a mother chooses to sit with herself and learns how to be with her feelings and ride the waves of the up and down and shows herself that grace and compassion, that in and of itself is
Yeah.
massive for healing this transgenerational stuff.
Yeah. I feel like this is one of the biggest jobs that we have as parents. The job of the previous generation is to facilitate growth and development of
Mhm.
new generations.
Hey, I'm Brooke Jean, therapist, recovering perfectionist, and struggling working mom on a mission to normalize normal. If you're an overwhelmed, high achieving, and secretly anxious mama, struggling to balance it all and on the brink of burnout, you are in the right place. Here is where we talk about hard things like balancing work and family life, mental health, and how to navigate life altering transitions. Nothing is too taboo here. In my conversations, I'll teach you how to let go of who you think you're supposed to be in order to create the life you've always wanted. Get ready to embrace your messy, shed the shoulds, and find freedom through a life unperfected. This is the Unperfected Pod.
Welcome back to the Unperfected Pod, Mama. I am so glad you're here. This week's conversation on the podcast was truly life-changing and transformational. I got to have a second conversation with my now friend, Marina O'Connor. Marina is a trauma therapist and serial entrepreneur. She's had a background in developing businesses and decided to pivot her career to become a therapist around 10 years ago. She now has an international psychotherapy practice focusing on working with transgenerational and developmental trauma. She is passionate about helping people to heal, grow, and change in their unique ways. Okay, so here's some of the highlights and some of the things to look forward to. First, we talk about what the heck is transgenerational trauma. Basically, what that is generational unconscious knowledge passed down from our grandmothers to our mothers to us to our children. And we talk a lot about how do we redecide what we pass on, which is really a ton about healing, feeling your feelings, and how to be a conscious parent. We talk about what is developmental trauma. We talk about the importance of sitting with and coming home to yourself and working through big feelings, how that is kind of the crux to any and all healing. We talk about how parenthood is really about facilitating and fostering growth and development of the next generation. And we talked about how our trauma affects us in doing just that. And then how do we do that more consciously? We talk about how when you heal mother, you heal the world. We talk about from a transgenerational lens, where does perfectionism come from? Where does this deep desire to be better, to do more, to go faster, where does it come from? And how can we unlearn those patterns and behaviors? We also just normalize writing the highs and lows. We normalize both of our left freaking eyeball has been twitching for months and how we interpret that as helping professionals. Anyways, there is a ton in here. She is an amazing mother. She's an amazing entrepreneur. She's based out of Portugal. And I just want to continue having conversations with her because so much of our mission are aligned. So get ready, grab your cup of coffee or tea, get a little notepad and notebook and a pen because this one has a ton of beautiful information. Enjoy.
It's
Welcome
exciting.
back. Welcome back to the Unperfected Pod, where we normalize normal, including left eyeball twitching for months on end, and we find freedom in a life unperfected. Hello, Mama. I'm so glad you're here today. I have a beautiful guest. Her name is Marina O'Connor. And you may have heard the podcast episode that I used from her podcast, the conversation that we've already had
Mm.
before. But we have more to talk about. And Marina is such a wealth of information, and her body of work is so important. And so I'm so excited to have her here today. Welcome, Marina, to the show.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you guys were laughing when we hit record because prior to hitting record, we were I was telling Marina that my left eyeball has been twitching forever, and she said, "Are you kidding me? So is mine." And we're like, "What does it mean?" And she's like, "I think it means we're taking on too
Yeah,
much and we need to
yeah,
practice what we preach."
I
So what do
think
you have to
so.
say about that, Marina?
Well, yes, this is, I think, what it says. I think it's interesting, right? Because I think when you are a practitioner, right, there's kind of an expectation that I definitely have of myself, that I'm kind of in the place of knowing and having it all together. And I think as
Mhm,
a parent as well, right, this is an
mhm.
expectation we very often place on ourselves, that we can't not know, or we can't struggle. So I think for me, yeah, this is where it's coming from. It's kind of having this pressure that I put on myself in many ways, because obviously life is challenging and it can get challenging. But I think it's this internal pressure that we very often put on us, right? That kind of triggers these reactions when our body just says quite directly, it's enough. And yeah, and I was just noticing, I'm sitting with my son and my eyes twitching. And I'm just kind of like wondering how many things, as I'm sitting with him, are going on through my mind. And there are like so many things. So I think it just comes with being able to remove, or at least remove some parts of that pressure that personally I notice I put myself. I don't know if kind of it resonates for you, but yeah, I just like think it's maybe an ability sometimes to let go of pressure and allow, things to happen, allow yourself to be where you are, without kind of rushing or trying to make something happen desperately, whatever it is that we want to happen.
Yeah, that pressure piece that you're pointing to
Yeah.
is really resonating, and I know it's probably resonating with a lot of the audience, like, even as someone who's actively working on shedding perfectionism and
Mm.
trying to be more present and trying to be more intentional and not doing all the things, I still fall into those traps, and it's
Yeah.
disguised sometimes because it's all things I wanna be doing, right? I have, like,
Mm-hmm.
opportunities coming in that are so exciting for business,
Mm-hmm.
and my kids are thriving and busy and all the
Yeah.
things, but it's like still it can be too much, and I think we have to do a better job listening to our bodies,
Yeah.
because there was probably some warning signs that I ignored
Mm-hmm.
before the
Mm-hmm.
eye is twitching like it's twitching,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what happens when we kind of dismiss those signs, what happens for me again, is that I collapse. So I kind of go like through this period of very, growth, and everything is happening and I'm making everything happen. And then, if my body is telling me kind of slow down, pay attention, pay attention. But then when I dismiss it, that the collapse happens. So there are going to be days when I don't feel any kind of energy, or where I don't want to do anything, or I just feel very, resistant to any kind of work, or just to any kind of pressure. So I think just being mindful of that is, yeah, it's definitely a skill that I think, especially if you're someone who has been dealing or kind of healing from your own developmental trauma or childhood trauma, and you were talking about perfectionism, this is such a kind of common trauma response, right? I think it's very difficult to shift from, I need to listen to myself. It's okay to listen to my body. It's okay to take care of myself. It's okay to nurture myself, because in many ways we might have learned that it's not okay, and we kind of constantly need to base our sense of self on being, on achieving, on what's happening. And the expectation very often, if I slow down, nothing is happening. But actually, very often
Mm.
when we do slow down, stuff is happening, right? Because this
Yes.
is, yeah. And I get really annoyed with my therapist when she tells me that, because I know she's right, but she tells me, stay in the gap, stay in the gap. And like, I want to kill her when she tells me that,
What does that
because
mean? Stay in the gap. What does that mean?
well, I think it means connect with
Mm.
yourself.
Mm.
Start running away, start chasing something. What are you chasing? Stay in the gap and reconnect with yourself, reconnect with how you're feeling, reconnect just with checking in, like, who are you doing it for? You
Mm.
know, like, who are you doing it for, or who, like, why do you think that this pace of doing, is it good for you? You know, what are
Mm.
you? So I think it just means reconnect with yourself, because I think very often when we're in this space of, you know, our body is giving us all these signals, but we still keep going, there's some degree of disconnection that's happening.
Totally. That's
Yeah.
huge. Okay, so
Yeah.
before we get too far down the bunny trail, because you and I can just go
Yeah.
off on all the
Yes,
things,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
tell the people, tell the mamas who you are, what you do, and how you got into what you're doing.
Who am I? So I'm a trauma therapist,
Mhm.
and I have my private practice. I live and work in Portugal and in the UK. So I have my private practice. I also have a mental health education business where I help organizations to support employees, to support working parents with mental health. So yeah, so that's what I do. So I kind of
Yes.
think of myself as a trauma therapist and an entrepreneur, because I come from my experience kind of in my past life, I guess, is in scaling and building businesses. And I kind of shifted into my psychotherapy training a bit later in life when I was 30. So, but yeah, but now what I do is I work with trauma.
Yeah, so you and I have that in common, right? Where we did the
Yeah.
corporate thing. We did
Yes.
that grind, we did that hustle,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
what was really the decision maker for you to switch gears and go into the healing modalities?
You know, I think at that point, I didn't really think about it kind of in that way. I think at that point, because I had to relocate to the UK, I had to exit my business, which was a VC backed business. So I kind of had, I think, quite a lot of loss. And I think I just went into the training because I wanted to heal myself. So I
Yeah.
don't think I kind of saw it as, you know, I'm going to be in a healing profession. That wasn't something at that point of my life that was, I guess, in the center of the
Mhm.
decision making. But I think now, as I look back, that was obviously there all the time for me. You know, I think kind of somewhat there were types of my personality that always has been in this healing profession, just how I was since I was growing up. You know, obviously being like a child of, you know, divorced parents, and kind of in a way always being in the middle of that. And I don't know, you know, if any whoever is going to listen going to relate to that. I think when you're going through that, then you're a child of the divorce, is very often kind of being in the position of someone who holds the polarities and try to make things right, to try to fix things. So I think, yeah, so at that point it was quite unconscious, obviously, but I went into the training just because I wanted to understand, I wanted to heal myself, and I was quite desperate to do that. And at that point I was in my own therapy for, I would say, 7 years or 8 years. So I've been, and it just like felt like it wasn't enough for where I wanted to be, and I wanted to have more tools and more understanding and more, yeah, and just an awareness.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I
Yeah,
guess
I
it was a cry for help at that point.
yeah, and I feel like that's
Yeah,
so many therapists. So
yeah,
many of us are just curious about our own suffering, honestly, is what
yeah,
I would kind of boil it down to, is our
yeah,
own way that we're no longer navigating the world in a way that
for
feels really
sure.
good,
Yeah,
and we get curious about that, and I do think there's this common thread of, like, it's comes down to development, like, we
hmm,
are passionate about growing and evolving and developing and healing and figuring out, like, what is blocking me from feeling
yeah,
my best and being my best. Now, how did
yeah,
you get into the trauma stuff? And then let's get into the generational stuff,
yeah,
because that is a piece that you're passionate about that I feel like
yes,
a ton of us don't know enough about, and it really affects us individually, but even
yeah,
more so as parents and as leaders for
yeah,
organizations.
yeah.
And so talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. How did I get into trauma? I think it's more that, it was quite natural. It was an evolution, right? Because it was obviously part of my own personal work, is was kind of understanding and working through my own trauma. And then I think again, kind of trying to understand. And I think something really happened, like one of the biggest shifts happened when I did, when I became a parent with my older son. He's going to be 6. And I think that just experience just made me realize how my own unresolved issues would influence him. And I think when I realized it, I got really scared, because, I don't think it's something that I knew, and that's not something that's very much spoken about, right? But I think that fear was about that. How can I help him to grow? How can I help him to develop? How can I support him if my experience of what I've received has been so different, So I kind of like had this realization that, I know what I don't want to pass on, but I really don't know how to not pass it on, because I've never learned different ways to parent, right? So we all have an experience of parenting from whatever we received when growing up. We all have very different understanding of what love is, even, and I think for me, that was probably just prompted and accelerated my interest, because I was basically thinking, oh shit, so now I have this huge responsibility for someone else's life, and I feel like I don't have the tools. I don't feel like I have the support. I don't feel I have enough understanding of my own relational trauma or developmental trauma or childhood trauma, whatever you call it, to be able to heal those parts of myself. Then, when I do that, I would be able to be, or I would be able to become an inspirational version of parent I want to be for my kids.
Yeah. Okay. So, for the person who's never even heard of transgenerational work or trauma, can you define what that is?
Yeah, I think I kind of see it as unconscious knowledge that is passed on from one generation to the next. So it's all kind of unconscious knowledge. If you think kind of simply, any kind of belief that we have about ourselves, any kind of belief that we have about the world, it's not created in isolation, right? If we believe that we are beautiful, that hasn't been created in isolation. If we believe that we're not good enough, that hasn't been created in isolation, and if whatever we think we can and can't do, all of that, none of that has been created in isolation. All of those beliefs are relational, transgenerational. So this is kind of how I guess I would describe it, as that unconscious knowledge that has a tremendous influence in our lives, and that's passed on from one generation to the next, whether we want it or not. Some of it is good, some of it is bad, but we pass it on whether we want or not, because it's all unconscious, non-verbal, and we carry that. And then I think kind of I see my, I guess purpose is to help parents, help people to redecide, right? What do they want to pass on? And we're not able to redecide everything, but we can change what we want to change, in a way that is possible.
Yeah, redecide what we pass on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like really hitting me good. Redecide what we pass
Yeah.
on. So, what are some themes of some transgenerational unconscious knowledge that were passed on to you, or themes that you see with your clients? You mentioned beliefs. Belief
Yeah.
systems are a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other things that you see that are passed on that we can break that cycle, we can break that pattern and redecide how we want to share unconscious knowledge with our kids?
Well, I think it's kind of, if you think about the experience of parenting, right? When we become parents, we're going to revisit every single developmental stage that we've also had as we were growing up. So everything that we
Mm.
have received and not received is going to come out as reactions, as kind of feelings that we can't explain, as maybe kind of different triggers, right? And very often, because some of those developmental stages are preverbal, we're not going to know rationally or explicitly why are we struggling in the way that we struggle, right? And very often this is where the blame comes. This is, very often, again, when this tension and pressure that we're talking about before comes, right? Because there is no understanding that we're not able to give what we haven't received, right? So, as an example of that, if you don't have a nurturing parent, if you don't have that experience of how does it feel to have someone who's nurturing, or who can stay with you, who can show up for you, who can just accept you for whoever you are, what we were kind of talking at the beginning about, not for what you do, not for kind of how you look, not for the grades that you bring from school, right? Just for who you are. Then how are you going to pass it on for your children if you didn't have that experience of nurture? And I'm talking like on a very bodily level, right? How does it feel to be loved in that way? So how are we going to find that warmth within ourselves if this is not something that we have received as we were growing up? So I think our kind of setting, and this is, kind of, I guess, that ongoing discussion between what's biology, what's, nurture versus nature, right? But we are kind of going to parent in a way that we were parented, right? We either are going to repeat it or we're going to reject it, right? But either is going to be from that place, I didn't have that. So I think when I talk about redeciding what do we pass on, it starts with, I guess, finding that warmth for ourselves, within ourselves, and then starting to give to ourselves what we haven't received. And then when we do that, this is what we're going to pass on, right? And this is not something which we kind of, it becomes, is just there for ourselves, and then we give it. Because we don't have that, we're not parenting from the lack of.
Wow. So it sounds like that's a bit of like, number one, just tending to yourself, right? Then it sounds like a bit of also some inner child work and some reparenting, right? And so that's one of the things that I really want to double click on and highlight here is when your kiddo turns a certain age, if you notice you're more heightened and triggered, a lot of times that is an age when something happened to you. And you may or may not remember because trauma doesn't stay in stories, in narratives, because it fragments off. And so, but a big one that I think you're talking about that's so relatable is so many of us as girls got in trouble for having big feelings growing up. Like I remember being at a dinner table and on TV, there was a really sad image that involved child abuse, which I can't even believe was allowed to be shown on television. And I freaked out. I didn't know then what I know now around how sensitive I am, particularly with children. And I started screaming and crying and I got in trouble. And I got in trouble and got sent to my room. And like, again, I believe my parents were doing the best they could with what they had. But now when my daughter, who's 6, has big ass feelings, because boys do too, but girls have big feelings. I almost feel paralyzed because my subconscious response is to like send her to her room.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm trying in the moment to break that cycle and to like lean in instead of leaning out. But it's so hard because it's like the unconscious part of you that is like, get that screaming away from me because it triggers me. And I wasn't allowed to do that growing up. Feels stronger sometimes than the conscious side of me that really wants to offer warmth and normalize big feelings. So that way my girl doesn't live a lifetime of repressed feelings that turns into a fucking eating disorder and perfectionism and all the things. So I don't know. That was a lot. I don't really, there's not really a question in there. It's just a share of like, this happens in everyday life in parenting.
Yes. And I think that you've like described as such a not wonderful in a way that, it's such a powerful, it's an example of the inner work that it actually takes to change those settings, right? We have. And I think, it's something that I see it, and, when you were talking about it, like as an inner work, but if you think kind of about how developmental trauma works, right? There are going to be parts of ourselves that are kind of stuck at the age when we didn't get developmentally the support that we needed, right? So for whatever reason, yeah, we kind of all understand the perspective, and parents give us what they're capable of, right? But for whatever reasons, we haven't received what we needed to keep growing up in a way that is healthy, right? I don't like this word healthy, but just like in a way that we all are capable of, just because if you think about it, the role of the previous generation is to facilitate growth and development of a new generation. And I'm just like thinking about how powerful is this statement, because if you think about how many of us had actually parents who saw their roles in this way, or maybe they saw it in this way, but actually what they were doing was not facilitating the growth, it was limiting the growth. Right. But what you're describing is kind of almost like, and I find myself in this place very often with my children, especially with my older one, is that I kind of like parent him from the same age sometimes that he is at. So that experience that you were describing to me, and I'm not kind of putting an experience for you, but I just, my response to that is almost like you are your own 6-year-old feels paralyzed of not receiving, right, the support that you needed as you were processing those emotions. And then it almost becomes 2 6-year-olds in a room not having the support or not having the experience of the support. And I think this is where the work that you were doing would make such a tremendous difference, because it's almost like you're holding your child ego state or like inner child, whatever it's called, depending on the modality, while also being able to show up for your child. And I feel like every time we're able to do that as parents is so amazing. And I think very often we dismiss it and we just maybe even like tell ourselves we're not doing it good enough. But actually, if you reflect on how significant that moment is when you're able to change that pattern for yourself and your children, it's just tremendous. Yeah, and I always like want the clients to sit with the hard work they're doing and how much change in that moment they're facilitating.
Yeah. I think we're so hard on ourselves, right? It's like if we haven't arrived at perfectly
Yeah.
patient parenting. I'm hearing a really loud sound. Is
Oh, I'm
somebody
so
doing
sorry.
construction?
It's outside. Can you hear
It's
that?
outside construction. Yeah. Yeah, I hear
Yeah,
knocking.
this is
It
so
sounds like a
annoying.
bear growling.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about it.
It's
I
okay.
don't know.
It's
It's
okay. We're gonna
outside.
roll
It's
with
just
it. It's
randomly.
outside.
Yeah, we're not having a good luck with that, are we?
No, we're having this conversation no matter what,
Yeah.
girlfriend. What was I saying? Oh, I feel like what you just said was really important because as mothers who tend to lean toward perfectionistic tendencies,
Yeah.
we think because we haven't totally broken the cycle, because we're not totally present
Yeah.
and totally patient, we're terrible mothers. But you're right that even just the pause, or let's say you realize my 8-year-old is parenting my 8-year-old and we're screaming at each other. If you walk away, but you come back, you regulate and you come back and repair,
Yeah.
you have no idea how powerful that is breaking of the
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's interesting is like I'm not only thinking about how this affects us as parents when you're like acting from your 12-year-old self or your 8-year-old. I see this shit every day in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like look at
Yeah.
our American politics. It's like inner teenage boy projecting on inner teenage boy. And then like
Yeah.
you see it in boardrooms. You see people
Yeah.
are leading teams. People are operating business from their triggered developmental trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, guys, no, we got to
Yeah.
do our work. We got to do our work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of that, and it's something what you said about the parents as well. I actually like think those ideas that as parents we need to be like a certain way, we need to be calm or we need to be patient all the time. They're so harmful because I think they take away the kind of humility and just human
The
nature of
humanness,
us.
the
Yeah.
humanness. It's okay for our kids to see us be
Yeah.
human.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
because when we're human, they can be human as well, then they kind of see us worrying about what we've done as parents, and they see us kind of, really in the place, okay, was it helpful for you? Was it not? That I kind of see us in this place of an evolution and growth. They also know that it's okay for them to be in that place as well. And I think, from that place of humility, of course, we're all people. Of course, we're going to carry, there's no resolution for trauma. There's no cure, right? We can be on our healing journeys, and we can heal, but it's not a destination, right? It's a journey. So I think we're going to be activated, we're going to be triggered, but as we go throughout healing journeys, we're just going to have so much more support for ourselves, and awareness that's very much different, and that will make those changes, like as an example you were making, because that's really what healing is about, is those moments where you're present with those intense emotions instead of fleeing them or being paralyzed by them, when you stay with, as opposed to try to take yourself out of that in whatever form it can take, right? And that's
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, that's the work right there. I I
Mhm.
I feel like there's a lot of fancy techniques to like arrive and develop and
Yeah,
grow. And really it all comes down to being with yourself,
yeah,
feeling your frickin' feelings,
yeah.
letting your feelings guide you and be
Mhm.
teachers and embodying. It's like that is what it all comes down to, but
Yeah,
it's also the place that we don't wanna be. We don't wanna
yeah,
be inside our bodies and feel our
yeah.
feelings.
Well, I feel we've learned that this is a place that's not familiar for us to be, right? So I think everything else is more familiar than this place of just it's okay to be with your feelings, which is just something that we've spoken about before we started the recording, is it? It's like
Mhm.
it's okay to be with whatever you bring in. And and I really kind of believe in this definition of change, that change happens when we become who we are as opposed to trying to be who we're not. And I
Mhm.
think this is really an example of, very often we come into therapy, and I was, that was my journey as well. I need to change myself, I need
Mm.
to like be this version of myself that I feel is going to be like more effective or like more accepted or more loved or whatever it is that we're trying to achieve by feeling that we need to change who we are constantly, and I think throughout my whole like years of that inner growth journey, I'm actually coming to, I'm okay just the way I am, and I've been okay all this time, but it's just I've been telling myself I wasn't. I've learned that I wasn't. And that
Mm.
is, again, it's transgenerational, right? This is all those information, this is all of those beliefs that we carry that tells us that this is not okay to be how we are or who we are, or to have a pace that's good for us.
Yeah, it's not who do we need to become out there, it's becoming more
Yeah.
and more of who you've always been.
Yeah, yeah, just go
Yes.
back to
Feeling the
to
layers
yourself,
too.
you know?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Where do
yeah,
you think this comes from? Because I'm passionate about perfectionism as a trauma response.
yeah,
Um, and it's so relatable to so many people, this like drive for more or this drive to be something. Do more, be perfect, be great at what you do. From a transgenerational framework, where the fuck does this come from?
yeah, yeah. I think, and first of all, I just want to say, like striving for excellent and perfectionism are two very different things, because
Yes.
I think very often when and I'm sure you get that as well, when, we work with perfectionists, it's not to give up your
Mhm.
desires, your achievements, to desire that part, to give up that part of yourself who wants to get all of those things. That's amazing, right? And none of the
Yes.
coping strategies is
Yes.
good or bad, but I think
Yes.
perfectionism is originated, I think it can be many kind of reasons, but for me is something where children have to grow up too fast. So it's
Mm.
for whatever reasons, children are taking upon an emotional responsibility for their parents, and they think from the very early age that they cannot feel their feelings, they cannot basically be children. So instead of relying on an attachment figure,
Mhm.
whatever, parents or whoever is taking care of a child, they feel that we need to put all of that attention and energy into those achievements, because this is the only way how we can be accepted in whatever family setting it is. So I think this perfectionism, or my experience in working with perfectionists, is kind of mostly working with children who had to grow up too fast, right? Parentified children
Mm.
who kind of learned very early on that just to be who they are is not okay, that, whether they need to deliver, whether they have maybe absent parents who can't take care of them, and they need to start to, again, take that emotional responsibility. That's not biologically possible for children, right? Because children are always children, and adults are sometimes children, as we were talking, right? When adults are parenting from those triggered parts.
Mhm.
So I think that's, for me, is the connection, the kind of
Mhm.
just having to grow up too fast.
Wow. That's landing, because what I hear you saying is one of the ways that you had to do that was in your parents' divorce, being the harmonizer, being the neutralizer, right?
Yeah.
And carrying that burden that we're not equipped to carry as a young child. And for me, how that relates is having a sibling who is born with a brain tumor and special
Yeah.
needs. At 8 years old, I remember making a conscious decision. That was when my sister
Yeah.
was born and she was in the hospital and stuff, that like I couldn't be an additional problem in the family. We
Yeah.
had enough stress, enough problems. And so I was going to be the golden child, right? I
Yeah.
was going to
Yeah.
be the one that like neutralized that energy in the
Yeah.
family system.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
nobody told me I had to do that. Nobody
Yeah.
expected that of me, and yet, as little beings,
Yeah.
we internalize it that way. So how do we
Yeah.
help our kids not neutralize, harmonize, or take on these roles that we don't even
Yeah.
realize we're giving them? Do you see what how do we
Yeah.
know if we're
Yeah.
giving
Yeah.
our child an
Absolutely.
assignment
Yeah.
they're not psychologically ready for?
Yeah, yeah. When you were talking about this, I was like thinking this is a very it's an adult thinking, right? When a child thinks this way, how you were sharing, this is what I have to do. This is now my role. This is what this role entails. And I think how we can heal by connecting to how actually it felt, what must it have been for us to
Mhm,
take upon this role, in this case at 8 years old, by actually feeling the weight of that, by connecting with the grief, by connecting with all the feelings that we were not able to feel as we were taken upon this role. And actually, again, just sitting with the weight of that for our 8 years old self, and just feeling from now an adult self how much we were caring, and just
mhm,
feeling whatever we want to feel in relations to that little girl who
mhm,
had to show up in that way. And what did it mean for her? What did it mean for her growth and development? Right.
mhm,
And just even looking at our children who are 8 and thinking now for them, how would it feel for them if one day they would wake up and just feel, okay, now I'm an adult. If they
mhm,
would have to skip
mm,
those years of the development where they can actually have someone who carries that weight for them. And I think it's really difficult because we don't want to very often to connect with that grief, or we don't know how to sit with that grief, or we think if we sit with that, it's going to be so overwhelming that it's going to paralyze us, right? But I think that's why the pace of inner work is so important, that we don't rush through whatever we are working on, you know. That is just kind of just being mindful of that. But yeah, I think it's all again about reconnection. Yeah, it's like disconnection to reconnection, disconnection to reconnection.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say that, because I feel like it's just been in the last couple of years that those feelings that you're talking about from the 8-year-old little Brookie,
Yeah.
they were really loneliness and confusion.
Yeah.
Loneliness and confusion. It was like, what's going on here? Because we didn't communicate as a family that Carly was sick, and here's why we're always at the hospital. And, you know, like my parents were literally flying by the seat of their pants. They were young. They
Yeah.
had 3 children, me, my younger brother, and my younger sister. They don't want to burden an 8-year-old with these
Yeah.
problems. But I didn't remember. I'm starting to feel
Yeah.
what
You
it felt like
remember.
to be so confused of
Yeah.
like, what the frick is happening here?
Yeah.
And a deep loneliness there. And so
Yeah.
just been trying to allow myself to feel that. Like, yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
I can feel, and also looking at like, where do I now I have familiarized loneliness and confusion. And
Yeah.
where has that shown up in my life? And what were
Yeah.
some of my coping mechanisms? So
Mm-hmm.
I think some of my my overperforming came from this desire to connect and not feel lonely. Like if I
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
entertain you through my humor and my singing and my dancing, then we could connect
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't be lonely and I wouldn't be a problem. I'd be a
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
also interesting to connect those dots of like, wow, as a child, so first you notice that you're triggered because your kiddo is,
Mm-hmm.
hitting that age or whatever. Or for
Yeah.
me, it just kind of started bubbling up. Then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, how old do I feel? Well, these
Yeah.
feelings started bubbling up at 8.
Yeah.
Well, I probably familiarized to those experiences. And what has that been like for me? And maybe how did I cope with that? What were my healthy
Yeah.
ways of coping and what were my unhealthy ways of coping? And showing yourself a ton of compassion.
Yeah.
And
And
that in and of itself heals the transgenerational trauma,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't even like think about it as healthy or unhealthy. This is what's available. This is what was available to an 8-year-old, right? And what do we
Right.
have like available as 8-year-old? What can we do without having the support that
Mhm.
we need to receive, right? It's so I think it's amazing that we've done it, right? And
Yes.
this is what I tell the clients sometimes. I was like, just it's amazing that you're here. It's amazing that whatever you've used, it helped you to survive, or it helped you to thrive sometimes even, right? Because
Yes.
but I think it's that stage of kind of what you were kind of describing, mourning and remembrance, right? When we remember, it's almost like it's coming through those feelings. Oh, this is how it felt. Oh, this is what it must have been. When we can kind of really remember, and sometimes it's like a bodily experience as opposed to be remembered here, right? We're like, oh, and I think very often as our children are bringing in those feelings as well that you're describing, then we kind of see that they're feeling isolated or they're feeling confused, and then we're kind of finding the ways to support them from the place of, okay, and now when I know how to support myself differently, then I've reconnected to this part. When I understand where it's coming from, then again I can show up for myself in a different way. So yeah, I think it's kind of an ongoing process of that reflection that you were describing, that we're kind of going to do whether we want it or not, because I think very often it's like, oh well, no, it's not going to come up for me, but it's always coming up for us, just because of how our neurobiology works, right? We all perceive information 90% based on the past templates. So it's not possible that we're not going to be influenced by those things we're talking about. So we can just kind of become aware, or more aware, because we're still going to talk from the current place of ignorance, right? As all of us are ongoing, but at
Mhm.
least we know a bit more.
Mhm. Wait, did you just say that we perceive information 90% based on our past?
Yeah, from a neurobiology perspective. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, like, I
Yeah.
I know that, but to hear that statistic, I don't feel like I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
know that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And just kind of like
Wow.
to think about any interaction we have with our children, we're going to unconsciously assess based on, is this familiar or not familiar? Do I kind of, what experience did I have with that?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I think just kind of normalizing that in a way that, and again, it's not an isolation that we have those conversations, right? It's not an, nothing is in isolations. It's all relational. We are relational beings. So
Mhm.
everything that we learn, everything that we don't learn, healing, harm, right? Trauma is relational. So I
Yes.
kind of see all trauma as relational. And I think this is why the healing is also relational, and it starts with a relationship with ourselves, with those kind of things that you were sharing about, how you notice, how you reconnect, how you do this work. And this is just, yeah, it's incredible, and it's life changing.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm having this moment of, like, gratitude right now where I'm realizing I knew intuitively before I knew consciously that when a mother heals herself,
Yeah.
that is how we save the children. That is how we
Yeah.
change things. Like, you heal the mother,
Hmm.
you heal the world. And so
Yeah.
kind of what I'm gathering from this whole conversation is when a mother chooses to sit with herself and learns how to be with her feelings and ride the waves of the up and down and shows herself that grace and compassion, that in and of itself is
Yeah.
massive for healing this transgenerational stuff,
Yeah. Yeah. I
right?
think, yeah, I feel like this is one of the biggest jobs that we have as parents, and I think very often, and I think like that, I've actually just read it before I came to meet you, that really, if you think this statement that the job of the previous generation is to facilitate growth and development of
Mhm.
new generations, but you think that you can only do it when you feel okay about yourself,
Mm.
when you feel okay in whatever sense, right? Because all of us have different sense of okayness, right?
Mhm.
For some, we need to be like, we need to achieve certain things. For some, we need to have like a family that we want. For some, we might, whatever it is, this is, it's like individual okayness, right? But I think only from that place we can facilitate someone else's growth, that we are in a position of, we are constantly growing, we are constantly developing, we're actually okay with who we are, and then we can help someone who
Mhm.
is growing and developing. Because if we don't feel like we're okay, then we're
Mhm.
not going to be able to show up for our kids in that way. Not
Mhm.
because we're bad or we're not trying hard, just because this is what we need to give to ourselves to be able to do that. And yeah, and I really think this is the most important job of parenting. And I think very often, when we talk about transgenerational stuff, I feel now we're in such a privileged position in many ways, because we have access to so much information, and sometimes it can be too much, sometimes it can be overwhelming. But
Mhm.
in many ways, our parents, our grandparents, they didn't have that amount of support. And I know that we always say that even now parents at the least supported, you know uh, yeah, like parents still don't get enough support. But I feel there is a lot in that place we're in now, where we can just kind of uh, receive quite a lot for ourselves, and we know more, and we have that awareness. So yeah, so I think it's the most important job, to heal ourselves, to really focus on that inner work that we were talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, when You're absolutely right. I believe the generations before us didn't have access to this knowledge or understanding about the psyche and the brain and body and
Yeah.
all trauma or any of that. But what I think is different about what you just said is when a parent chooses to do the work and chooses to heal, they can see it through the lens that
Yeah.
you just did. You can say, my parents didn't have the tools. They did the best they could. That still was traumatic. And I want to do better for my children. An unhealed parent who's not doing the work says to their child, you don't have it as bad as I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And that is a
it's
transgenerational thing I think we've
yeah.
gotta cut out, the, like, "You don't have it as bad as I did." So then you make your kids feel shame for wanting to feel healthy, happy, and
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah. Or just like for wanting to feel differently, for wanting to feel separately, for wanting to be
Mhm.
separate, right?
Mm,
Because this is what we want. We want them to be separate. We want an autonomy for, well,
mm,
ideally, right? And autonomy is
yes.
also not like it's a journey because we can never be fully autonomous, but this is like ideally what they need for their growth and development. But very often we put our own expectations of how we think they should be, again, that are based on how we think we should be to receive love. And that's why kind of I think this concept that was so life changing for me, that I've realized that we don't have to earn love.
Mm, mhm.
We don't
Wow.
have to earn love. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, what? Wait, what?
Yes.
Like, what?
What, like, let's chew on that nugget for a
Yeah,
while. We
yeah,
don't have to earn
yeah,
love.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Whoa.
And I think this is what I kind of, I guess, want. I guess I think this is the most important thing that I want my children to know, that they don't have to earn my love.
Mm. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like that's such a beautiful place to end
Mm,
at, Marina.
mm,
Like, I really
yeah.
want everybody listening to try to let
Mm,
that in and breathe that
yeah.
in and write it down and try to connect to it until it feels more familiar in your
Mm,
body, that you don't have to do anything or be anyone other than who you are to
yeah.
be deserving of love. And same goes obviously for our kiddos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we
Yeah.
parent from
Yeah.
that viewpoint, if we parent from that place and that intention,
Yeah.
man, we're doing a lot right. And we can still mess up. We can still be messy.
Yeah.
We can still get
Of
triggered,
course.
but we have an awareness of that intention and
Yeah.
we can come back to that and we can repair. And all of that is so powerful with setting them up for that growth and
Yeah.
development that you talked about.
Yes. Yes.
I
Yeah.
love it. Well,
What you've
thank
said.
you. Yes. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
hopping on all the way from Portugal, and tell the beautiful people where they can connect with you, how they can work with you, all the good things.
I have a program that's called What Do We Pass On? And this is a program that I've developed for parents and everyone else who want to start healing from transgenerational trauma. And it's an online program. And I'm just going to share a link if that's okay. But yeah, I have a website. I'm on Instagram. We can find each other. I feel easily in this time. So yeah, I'm kind of here. And whoever needs to find me, they're going to find me.
Yeah, and I'll link all of that in the show
Thank
notes.
you.
But thank you for the beautiful work that you're doing. I'm so glad that we've connected. I
Me too.
continue to want to have discussions with you because
Yeah.
I feel like our missions are so aligned. So
Yeah, yeah,
thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was
Yes, and for the
wonderful.
beautiful, and for the listeners, take care of yourselves and therefore each other. And we'll see you same time, same place next week. Bye for now.
Bye.
Hey, Mama, if you made it to the end of this episode, I just want to virtually high five you because you've said yes to the opportunity of taking better care of yourself. And that is so meaningful and so amazing. You have no idea the ripple of goodness that's to come. If you've been enjoying the show, if you've been finding it helpful, if you've laughed a little or learned a new technique, will you do me a favor? Will you make sure that you're following the show, that you've given us a 5-star rating and left a review? That will absolutely help us get this podcast into more heads and hearts of as many mamas as possible, because when we heal the mother, we heal the world. Also, if there's a specific episode that you've loved, will you make sure to share it with a friend? Just send them the link or share it on social media, and make sure you tag me at Brooke Jean Unperfected, because I absolutely love seeing that this is actually giving you the impact that you so desire and deserve. Thank you so much, mamas. Make sure you're taking care of yourselves and therefore each other.